Perfect. Thank you. All right. So next slide, please. What do we do at the commission? In a nutshell, we regulate utilities. But if you're not a utility, maybe that's actually a more complicated thing than that simple statement suggests. So let me try and break it down. Utilities, Hawaiian Electric is here. There's Hawaii Gas is here. These are utilities. They're shipping utilities in the state, transportation utilities. But basically what the commission does at a basic level is regulate how those utilities operate. And it does it in a particular way. And that particular way is to try and align the behavior of these private utilities with the public interest. Now, again, that's a deceptively simple statement. There's quite a lot that goes into that, but that is our basic goal, is to make sure that these entities that are providing essential public services do so in a way that benefits the public. There's more to say, obviously, but that's a start. So next slide, please. That's the basic of what we do. How we do it is in docket. So you are participating in a docket right now. This equity proceeding is a docket, but everything we do essentially is in a docket. What that means is it has a number assigned to it, and that number helps us keep ourselves organized. And if you have that number, you can get all of the information about any proceeding that the commission is doing. And now I'm going to walk you through how you would do that. So next slide, please. We have something called a document management system. And this is going to be good for at least another few months. It is going to be replaced by an even better system, but I'll show you what we have right now. It's a web page, and the way you use it is if you get a docket number, you can find all your documents. Next slide, please. You put a docket number right here. Click go. So a docket number, it has a year, it has 4 numbers after that. And then, sorry, now next slide, please. So once you do that and you click go, you get a page that can be a little confusing, but what you probably want is the tab that says documents. So when you click on that tab that says documents, next slide, please, then you get a nice list of all of the documents in the docket. And on the left-hand side, there's a little page icon. You click on that page icon, and that will open the document. You can see the document title, the date it was filed, who filed it typically. But that's how you get access to all the information about pretty much everything we're doing. Next slide, please. There's also another easy way to follow what's going on, and that is called subscribing to a docket. So again, this is back on the main page of our document management system, or sometimes we call it DMS. On the right side, if you click on subscribe, next slide, please, subscribe to distribution list. Then click on dockets filed, that middle one. Next slide, please. Put in your email address, put in the docket number, click save. You should get an email within the next minute or two asking you to verify that you really wanted to subscribe to that docket. And what that will do for you is every time there's a new filing in that docket, you'll get an email. That email will say that there's a new filing in the docket, who filed it, and it'll give you a link to it so you can read it. The easiest way to follow along. That's what most of the commission staff do, to follow the dockets. Next slide, please. So that's the real nuts and bolts of how you look at information in a docket. But what if you want to get involved? What if you don't just want to read? What if you want to tell us something about what we should do or what somebody else should do in one of the dockets? I'm going to go over 3 ways that you can do it. One is very low commitment, and some are very high commitment, and then there's one kind of in the middle. So we'll start with public comments. So next slide, please. A public comment you can file at any time in any docket. Literally anytime. If you've got a burning idea in your head and you can't go to sleep, and at 2 in the morning you want to write the commission an email, puc.comments@hawaii.gov anytime. Tell us the docket you're interested in. Tell us what you want to say. You can say anything. Ideally, it's germane to that docket. We will read it. Commission staff will read those public comments. So that's the easy, and there's no other commitment. Anybody can do it at any time, say what they want relevant to that docket. We will read it. But if you want to get more involved, there are other ways to do that. So let's go to the next slide. And we'll go to the other end of the spectrum. This is intervention. So typically our interveners are people who believe that their rights are at stake in a commission docket, and what the commission decides will affect their rights, whether it's an individual or corporation. So this is the highest level of involvement you can have in a commission docket, unless you take a job here. And you would get in by moving to intervene. And I'll talk about that briefly, but also I should say all of these slides have some notes with some of the rules and regulations in them. Those will be posted to the Equity website. So if you'd like to review these later in more detail, you will be able to. But intervention really is your rights are at stake, and you have an interest in everything that goes on in this proceeding. Next slide, please. So a third way to get involved is what we call participation, or sometimes limited participation. And this is if you have an interest in a single issue in a docket. Some dockets may have many, many issues in them, and you're particularly interested in some, but not all, then you could move to participate in a commission docket. And the idea here is you have information that you think will help the commission make a good decision. Or maybe you have some rights at stake, but specific to this one issue, or a subset of issues. And in that case, you would move to participate. It's not quite as big a commitment as full intervention, but it's close. So it's pretty involved, but I'd like to at least talk to you a little bit more about how to do it if it's something you want to do. So next slide, please. For most commission proceedings, if you would like to either intervene or participate, you have to act fairly quickly. 20 days after an application is filed, or in the case of a rate case, commission has public hearings, it's 20 days after the last public hearing in that rate case. That's your deadline. If you would like to intervene or participate, you can file public comments at any time, including after these deadlines. But this docket is a special case. We're doing something that we don't normally do in this docket, which is we've suspended these deadlines. People can move to intervene or participate at the moment indefinitely. At some point when this docket ends, or near when this docket ends, we will probably limit that participation. But for right now, it is open, and we would be happy to have more people intervene, participate, or just show up to a meeting. Next slide, please. I'll be very quick on this one. This is just a way to do electronic filing with the commission. There's a link in the slide notes. We'll put it up on the Equity website. But if you want to file these motions to intervene or participate, you need to file them electronically, or that is one, I think, the easiest way to do it. And the link will be up on our Equity website. But next slide, please. If you'd like, you can also make your filings in person or by mail right here at the commission, 465 South King Street. And then the last thing I want to talk about, next slide, please, is when interacting with commission staff, there are some things we'd really like to help you with, and there are other things we'd really like to help you with, but we can't. So I'd like to go over just a little bit of the difference here. If you're interested in when is the deadline, if you're interested in any procedural question, time, place, what is supposed to happen at a particular step, we can answer that. And commission staff, commissioners, we can answer that. And we're happy to answer that. If you're interested in the substance of a docket, if you're interested in, let's say in a rate case, if you think the rate of return should be something in particular and you want to talk to a commissioner about that, you can't do that. And if you want to ask them a question about that, they can't answer. And the reason is we do the public's business and we have to do that business in public. So private conversations with commission staff can only be limited to a very small subset of things that might be interesting, they might be able to help you on. But if we want to talk about the substance of any docket, we need to do it in a way where everybody involved in that docket has an opportunity to be present and to participate and to know what's going on. So we're doing our business in public, not in private. Again, there's a lot more in the notes of that slide, but with that, I think, do you want to do questions now or go straight to you, Grace? Let's take some questions. If you have any questions about what I've said, I'd be happy to take them now. We have one in the room in back.
Right, Michelle, I want to make sure you use them. Just a quick question to clarify, when it says 20 days to file, is that business days or calendar days?
It is calendar days, but there are some special exceptions in the rules. Specifically, holidays don't get counted in those 20 days. But if you're interested, I'd be happy to walk you through all of the procedural rules that are in HAR 16601.
Are there any questions online?
I'm not seeing any right now, but I do encourage folks to either raise your hand and we can have you unmute, ask your question, or put your questions in chat.
Hi, I'm wondering if you can make the presentation recordings from today available online on the Energy Docket, Equity Docket website for folks that might not have been able to join this evening.
That is the plan. Sorry to cut you off. Yes, we will make these recordings available on the website within a few days of the end of this meeting.
Thank you. And I had one more, which is for people who are watching who might not be as familiar with the PUC process. Could you explain a little bit more about what the commitment level entails for intervention, participation, and public comments so that folks can evaluate what would be the best option for them?
Absolutely. So let me start with intervention. If you're an intervener in a docket, it gives you rights, but it also gives you responsibilities. So you'll have the right to ask questions of some of the other parties in the docket. We call these information requests. Or maybe I'll do, great. But if you're an intervener, one of your responsibilities might be answering information requests. So, and that can typically be on a short timeline. It could be 10 business days, and you'd have to return written answers to sets of questions. And that can be cumbersome if you're somebody who has something else to do. If you're not a professional, that can be a big time commitment. It does depend on the docket, but same thing for the limited participant, but they could only ask questions that are limited to the issues that their participation is limited to, and likewise would only be asked to answer questions related to their area of expertise. Another point is if you're an intervener or a participant, you get some legal rights, including the right to contest a commission decision. If you are just a public commenter, you tell the commission you really think they should do one thing and the commission does another thing. You don't have a right to appeal that decision. But if you're an intervener and you told the commission to do one thing and the commission did another thing, you would have a right to appeal that decision. But again, that's not something that is easy. I don't mean to suggest it is. It is, but it is a right that would come with intervention. Does that get at what you need? Other questions?
Mike, we have a question online if I could ask it.
Sure.
So the question is, how long does it usually take for the PUC to respond to the different kinds of comments and files submitted to a docket?
That's a good question, and there isn't a usual answer. Often the comments that are filed, if it's a public comment, the PUC typically won't respond. We'll read them, but we will not typically respond directly to the commenter. If it is a in an intervention or participation, comments usually come in the form of a statement of position, where if you're involved in a particular docket, you want the commission to do something. And you'll ask the commission to do something, and you'll give reasons why you think the commission should do something. And that typically comes pretty late in the process of a docket, but it's usually the second to last thing that happens. And the last thing that happens, the commission's response, is an order. And that order is the commission saying, after we've looked at the record, after we've heard all the arguments, here's our decision. And it comes out in writing. If you subscribe to a docket, you'll see it as soon as it comes out. And that's the response, where you find out what the commission wanted to do with all of the information and argument before it. And unfortunately, every case is different. So there's no usual timeline for that. Sometimes a docket can be fairly short, a few months. Other dockets can take years.
Okay, not hearing any other questions. Sarah, maybe you could bring up the slides again. Okay, great. So I get the pleasure of talking about this docket in particular. We're going to talk a little bit about what the scope is and sort of how we're beginning to think about this docket. Of course, this is the start of the conversation, and there's so many opportunities to give your input and for the proceeding to move forward with, however we feel is best. You can go to the next slide. So I wanted to start with some key terminology. I think it's really important that we all have a shared language to discuss these issues, and that we have a shared understanding of what it is that we're talking about. This helps us to be specific about the issues we are trying to address and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So I just pulled a couple of definitions out of our opening order, but there's a much larger list there as well. And I also want to note that these definitions are really more from sort of a literature review and can definitely be updated or adapted as we go. I do know that Energy Equity Hui is working on definitions that are very Hawaii specific and informed by our experiences here. So I think once those are ready, we would hope to align with definitions that are being operationalized out there in the world and that we can all align on. So just as a starting point, I offer a couple of definitions here that I think are particularly key as we get going. First, energy equity. So energy equity refers to the goal of achieving equity in both the social and economic participation of the energy system, while also remediating social, economic, and health burdens on those historically harmed by the energy system. We may also refer to vulnerable populations, and right now we're thinking about those as populations who are economically disadvantaged, maybe certain racial and ethnic minorities like Native Hawaiians, elderly, rural residents, those with inadequate education, and those with other socioeconomic challenges. And then energy burden. I think this is a key term that we hear a lot. It's what we mean when we say energy burden, we're referring to the percentage of a household's income that's spent to cover their energy costs. And that may include gas, electricity, other energy usages as well. To the next slide. So additionally, there are different tenets or facets of equity that we could look at and aim to address. Again, these are just some preliminary definitions for us to consider. First is distributive equity, and this is recognized as sustainability or energy programs and policies that result in fair distribution of benefits and burdens across all segments of a community, especially prioritizing those with highest need. Another is procedural equity. This is the inclusive, accessible, authentic engagement and representation in processes to develop or implement sustainability or energy programs and policies. Third is recognition justice. This identifies who's being ignored in decision-making and how that should be remedied so that all individuals are fairly represented and offered equal political rights. And finally, we have intergenerational justice. This relies on making decisions based on whether a decision would increase rather than limit the development options for future generations. And again, I do note, I know that these definitions are being actively workshopped, and I hope that we can align on those going forward as well. We'll go to the next slide. So also, as we get started on this effort, I think it's really important to ground ourselves in what the challenges are that we're facing. Of course, this is definitely not an exhaustive list, and all of you will bring additional insight on what your experiences are and what challenges that you're facing in your lives and your communities. And we really do want to hear those and see if we can address them in this proceeding. So those listed here are simply a few of the most pressing challenges that we as the PUC are facing right now and that we see in our communities. High energy rates, increasing an increasing population of low and moderate income people, especially with the pandemic that posed a lot of challenges to our communities here. High energy burden, lack of access to renewable energy, need for payment assistance, inequitable siting of fossil fuel infrastructure in our past, land constraints, our regulatory process burdens, and many others. So how are we going to address these? Well, as our commission staff got started on this docket, we brainstormed a number of ways we could start to work towards more equitable outcomes in this proceeding. And we sort of grouped them into 4 major buckets or categories that we hope can sort of help guide our efforts. You can go to the next slide. So first is energy affordability and direct financial assistance. And in our minds, this category of tools would aim to sort of directly impact the amount that customers are paying towards their energy bills and directly addresses utility bill affordability and energy burden. There's a lot to draw from in terms of tools in our toolkit on this bucket from our own experiences in Hawaii as well as in other states. And I'll just note, there's a lot of complicated issues to consider with these types of programs. So we'll have to move carefully to ensure that, a rate discount or bill credit does not actually shift costs to other vulnerable customers. A lot to consider there. Go to the next slide. Our second bucket that we've identified is equitable access to clean energy. And this category of tools recognizes that certain populations have been overburdened or left out of our clean energy transition so far. For example, rooftop solar or customer-sited solar made up nearly half of the renewable energy mix in HECO's territories in 2021. And it really helps to offset customer bills, but these resources are not accessible to everyone, like renters, people who live in big apartment buildings, low and moderate income households, et cetera. And we also know that certain communities have been frequent and longtime hosts to fossil fuel infrastructure. So this bucket we might imagine is a place where we could look at things like community benefits for host communities. And I will note the Equity Hui already filed some helpful input on that topic. So thank you for that. Financing opportunities, making sure that our programs are accessible to folks, and many, many other items. Go to the next slide. Our third bucket is utility business model reforms. And this category of tools recognizes that there are incentives built into the current public utility business model that either may promote equity or may be a drawback to equity. And I think this toolkit aims to sort of elevate those aspects of the business model that promote equitable outcomes and modify or adjust or eliminate those that do not. For example, you might look at whether modified accounting practices could help improve customers' ability to pay their bills or reduce their debts. You might also look at whether disconnection bans or moratoriums might be appropriate. That's something we explored during the pandemic and might be something we could look at here. Also, it's often said that you can't manage what you can't measure. So tracking key metrics related to equitable outcomes could be something we consider here so that we have data going forward. We know where we need to look and where we can improve. And again, there are trade-offs with each of these mechanisms. So we'll just need to move carefully and be thoughtful about what we're undertaking here. Next slide. Finally, our fourth bucket is procedural equity improvements. And this one might require a lot of internal looking at the PUC. We seek your input on that as well. But these tools aim to sort of build equity and justice into our regulatory processes and across utility functions. This is really, we want to ensure that what we do here in this docket is sustainable going forward. It becomes common practice across all of our work moving forward, and that we're addressing these issues at a systemic level rather than on an ad hoc basis or a one-off basis. For example, I think some of the things we might think about in this bucket would be more streamlined and effective community outreach and customer education on our programs, making programs more easily accessible by improving how customers sign up for those programs. Thinking about what metrics the commission might want to track about its own work and how we're achieving the desired outcomes, and just making our proceedings more accessible and open for everybody. You can go to the next slide. I just wanted to provide some closing thoughts that we know this will not be easy work, and that a lot of these challenges are going to take time to resolve or make progress on. We in this docket are thinking about it as a balance between the need to take action and showing you all that we are serious about this by really acting on your suggestions and what we come up with here, but also being mindful that we don't want to create unintended consequences, and we want to be mindful of your time and bandwidth as well. So we will move at a measured pace, and we want to really make informed decisions. And I just want to close by repeating what I've already said and what others have said, that this is the start of our conversation and our work together. So our next meeting, we're going to get much more into the substance and process of the docket, and we'll be soliciting your input on how we're currently thinking about how we might proceed with this docket. So that's what I have, and I'd be happy to take your questions now, or all of us would.